Okay, so this is 4-6B, more on functions. So function notation, the way you write the information is this, okay? You have, Melian, sit, focus. We're gonna do notes, right? Nuh-uh. Sit in your seat and pay attention. Function notation looks like this. Does anyone know how to say that?
FS.
Oh, you're close. There's a word. So you can say it as f of x, okay? Or the function of x.
Why don't they just
Okay?
instead of X?
Because do you want to have to write that out every time?
No.
It's much easier just to say this. Yeah, you say, like, I will say f of x every single time. But it is the function of x that we're talking about, okay? I'm sorry. All right, so the first example with these, okay? It says the function w of x equals 250x. Here's what I need you to understand. Are you all listening? Because if you don't get this, it's going to be really confusing. And if you do get this, Melian, go sit in that back corner. You can't seem to keep your hands or your information to yourself today, so just go sit back there. So if we look at this, okay, w of x, right? That's like f of x, the function of x. We're doing it with a w. That doesn't change anything. The w just stands for something typically. So w in this case is the number of words, right? So our letters match up with what it is we're talking about. Here's what I need you to understand. Are you hearing me?
No.
Understand this. This is essentially your y. When you see w of x, just think y, okay? What we're saying is the function of x. So whatever we're going to plug in for x is going to get us our w of x, our y, essentially, okay? So here's what it says. W of x equals 250x represents the number of words. So w of x is representing our words that you can read in x minutes. Okay? No, you don't get to ask a question yet. How many words can you read in 8 minutes? Okay, so you have this function, w of x equals 250x, okay? And it told us that x is what?
What?
X is in y.
Oh.
X is, what does it say in the problem?
Minutes.
X is the minutes, right. Okay, so now here's the question. How many words can you read in 8 minutes? What are you doing?
Let me try.
Adding, multiplying.
You're multiplying. You're going to plug in your x, right? So here's how you set it up. This is where it looks a little bit different than the y. You would say w of 8, okay? So the function of 8, when we plug 8 into our function, we're going to get 250 times 8, right? We're just dropping in the 8 for our x value. That does not mean we're multiplying something by 8 on the left. That is just saying the function of 8. If I plug 8 into something, that's what that's saying, okay? You don't need to solve with this. You don't do anything with this. You leave this completely alone. What you do is you just multiply this. So if what it's saying is the function of 8, when I plug 8 in, I get 250 times 8, which is 2,000. Okay, and that's all you have to do. You don't do anything else with that 8. That w of 8 stays w of 8. Okay, so the question was, how many words can you read in 8 minutes? How many?
2,000.
Right, you can read,
Or is it?
I don't really know. You can read 2,000 words in 8 minutes.
I can read like 10 words. So did I. Are you serious?
Okay, here's the deal. Shh. You do not need to do anything with this, right? A bunch of you are going to try to in the homework because it's a weird setup and you're not used to function notation. So I'm going to say it again. Don't do anything with w of 8. You leave it alone. You don't multiply. You don't divide. You don't do anything. You leave it be. Right, Melian?
Yeah, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you something.
Yes, what's your question?
Somebody try like raise like a minute for like no. What?
Okay, moving on. Number 4, it says the domain of f of x equals negative 1.5 plus 4. Okay, so this is our function. Okay, it says the domain is this. What is domain? Hold on. It's the x, right? Okay, so they gave us the x values. And now it says to find the range. What is the range? Y values. Okay, so we're looking for the y values. Now, in this case, what did I say is the same as the y values? F of x. Okay, so we're looking for what does it equal. Here's what you do. You have to solve 4 different problems because we have 4 different x's. But the beauty is it's the same 4 problems with a different number plugged in. So we're going to say f of 1, because that's our first domain value, equals negative 1.5 times 1, because that's what we're plugging in right now, plus 4. Okay, that's the first problem you're going to solve. The second problem you're going to solve is plugging in this 2. So f of 2 equals negative 1.5 times what? 2. That's your x value, plus 4. Okay, the third problem you're going to solve is f of 3, because that's my 3 value here, equals negative 1.5 times 3 plus 4. And the fourth one that you're going to solve is f of what? 4, right? That's our last domain value. F of 4 equals negative 1.5 times 4 plus 4. Okay? You can literally plug that into your calculator. Negative 1.5 times 1 plus 4. Anyone got their calculator out?
Miss, I have one thing.
What?
I have a new calculator. I forgot giving.
Oh, yes. I meant to ask you about that. Where is it?
Right now in my bag.
Okay. Will you go put it in my drawer?
I'm sorry. No,
Thank you.
I need to do my homework.
No, you don't get to do your homework with it. So this is 2.5 when you plug it in. Okay, so f of 1 is 2.5. Again, we are not touching f of 1, right? You're not doing anything with it. You're just using it as a reference point, okay? F of 2, if you plug negative 1.5 times 2 plus 4 in, you get 1. Okay, if you plug negative 1.5 times 3 plus 4, you get negative 0.5. Okay, if you plug 4 in, what now? Can you not be a distraction for like 2 minutes? Just give me 2 minutes. That would be great. This one comes out to negative 2. Okay, so here's the question. Find the range. What's your range? It's all those numbers, but how do we put them? In order, no duplicates, right? So your range right now is this. You would say my range is negative 2, negative 0.5, 1, and 2.5. Okay? So you're literally just plugging in those 4 numbers and solving it those 4 times to get your range. Questions on that?
No, I have one thing. What happened with the with the Y?
These are the Y's.
Okay, with that? 1, 2.
These are the X's.
All
right. Last one. So this one says you have 3 quarts of paint to paint trim in your house. 3 quarts of paint. Okay, that's the amount of paint you have. A quart of paint covers 100 square feet. They give you the function A of Q. Okay, so the amount of quarts equals 100 times the number of quarts. Or the area, sorry, not amount. Area of quarts equals the 100 times the number of quarts you did in square feet. That Q quarts of paint cover. So A of Q is the area. Q is the number of quarts. Okay? What domain and range are reasonable? And then you're going to graph it and find the least and greatest domain, the amount of paint, and the least and greatest range or area that you can have. Okay, now this one's a little tricky. You have to figure out what makes sense here. So we are talking Q and A of Q. Okay. Q they said was our quarts of paint. A of Q is our area. Okay. What's the least amount of paint you could use to paint the trim?
None.
You could use none, right? I just didn't feel like painting today. So your quarts could go as low as 0. What's the most number of quarts you can use?
Like a 50.
How many do you have?
100. I don't know. 3.
You have 3 quarts of paint, right? So the biggest number of quarts you can use is 3. So your domain has to be between 0 and 3. Okay, that's our domain.
No, I don't like it. Oh my God.
Okay, you can't use less than 0 quarts, and you can't use more than 3.
I was terrible
Okay.
in that class. It was I was. No, I had this.
You log in the front.
That part, the simple part, I don't like it.
The
It's
what?
like hard.
Symbol?
Like the
Less than?
Like the lesson part.
Yeah. It's just saying between 0 and 3.
Like 3 and 4. I'm okay with the 3 and 4. I got it.
Great. Okay, we're not done with this, so pay attention. Maybe it will come to you. The range. Okay, for your range here, you have to figure out what can your y values be. Now, they gave you this function. A of q equals 100 q. Your domain, we just said,
What's this called?
is between 0 and 3. Okay? So if I plug in 0, what do I get for my y?
I don't know.
0.
You get 0, right? If I plug in a of 0 equals 100 times 0, 100 times 0 is 0. Okay? If I plug in 3, the high end, what would I get?
0.
300, right? A of 3 is 100 times 3. We're just plugging it into the function that they gave us. So that means the highest area we can cover is 300 square feet. Okay, so when we're looking for domain and range, once you figure out what your domain needs to be, what your x values can be, you plug in both of those x values, 0 and 3, and you get your range, 0 to 300. So the range has to go from 0, we'll call this a of x, you could call it y
1, 2.
to 300. Okay? So you have domain here, you have range here. Then it asks you to graph it. So we're going to plot a couple more points. We're going to plot 1 and 2 just to see where our graph is going to go. So if I plug in 1, a of 1 is what? 100 times 1, so it's 100. Okay? If I plug in 2, a of 2
No way.
is 100 times 2, which is 200. Okay? So we're going to graph it. You guys are really good at this by now. What is this label going to be down at the bottom?
1, 2, 3. 0 quarts.
It's quarts. That's your x value, right? So this is the number of quarts. And our quarts range from 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 3. Okay, what's going to go on the vertical axis?
100, 200, 300.
But what are we talking about? What's our y
Oh.
thing? Area. This is going to be the area. Okay, and you may count by whatever you want, but counting by hundreds makes a lot of sense here. So 100, 200, 300. Okay, so when you graph this, you are plugging in these points: 0, 0, 1, 100, 2, 200, and 3, 300. Now here's my question. Is this a continuous or a discrete graph? Do we need to draw a line in here?
Yes.
Why?
Because you can use like half.
You could use half of a quart. You could use a quarter of a quart, right? You don't have to use a full quart of paint every time you paint. So we're going to draw a line in, but here's the thing. We can't draw a continuing line, right? Why? You only have 3/4, right? So you can't go past that 3. So you just draw a segment, essentially. You just draw that in. Okay, and that would be your graph. Does that make sense?
Well.
Okay. We're not going to do another one. You don't need to take notes on this. I'm just going to give you a quick, let's see if we could come up with a setup here. Okay, this is not technically part of the notes, but I feel like you were a little confused coming up with domain and range. Let's say the problem was this. You have, what's a good scenario?
Olivia.
Oh, pot calling the kettle black, maybe? Let's do this. Let's say you need 1 cup of milk to make
Zero. Frosting.
Did
You know that you can't drink a gallon of milk in an hour? Yes.
I did know that. 3 pounds of cheese. That's totally not true, but I'm just making this up, okay? So you need 1 cup of milk to make 3 pounds of cheese. So your function would be, the amount of cheese equals 3 times however many cups of milk you would get, okay? So this is gonna be our pounds in cheese. This is our function. If this is my setup and I say you have 8 cups of milk,
You're way off.
let's make some cheese, okay?
It's actually 30 pounds of milk to make 300 cheese.
Great. So if we have this to work with and we have 8 cups of milk, what is our domain? What's our possibilities for our X value, my C here?
8.
8 is the max, right? You only have 8 cups of milk to work with. So that means you could use as little as 0 or as much as 8, okay? So what is your range?
Emma, why you pack it? Emma, stop.
Shh, you stop. No, you stop. What's the range? If my domain is from 0 to 8, what do I have to plug in here to find my range? 0 and 8, right? If I plug a 0 in here, that's going to give me 0 pounds of cheese. If I plug 8 in, what does it give me? 8 times 3, so 24. That is my range then, okay? So it's not as hard as it seems. You take the number that they said you have this many to work with, that's the high end of your domain, and then you plug that in, and that's the high end of your range, okay? All right, the end.